In the heart of Tennessee, where spring brings redbud trees to bloom across rolling hills, a 16-year-old girl with bright eyes and boundless dreams stepped into a gold Mazda and vanished without a trace. Amber Elizabeth Cates, energetic, sociable, on the cusp of adulthood, disappeared on April 11th, 2004, leaving behind a community that would spend decades searching for answers. As seasons turned to years, her bedroom remained untouched, her family's grief crystallized in time, and investigators chased shadows across state lines. What began as a possible runaway case transformed into something far more sinister, a haunting mystery of abduction and silence that would test the limits of faith, family, and forensic science. But after years of silence, a single clue would shatter everything. Before I tell you what happened, comment your country and time below. The morning of April 11th, 2004, dawned bright and warm over Columbia, Tennessee. Spring had arrived early that year, painting the landscape with dogwood blossoms and redbud trees in full bloom. At 7:30 a.m., Amber Elizabeth Cates rolled out of bed in her mother's home on Tracy Lane, the scent of wisteria drifting through her open window. 16 years old with honey blonde hair that caught the sunlight and eyes that shifted between green and blue depending on her mood. Amber moved through the morning with the restless energy of a teenager on the verge of freedom. Amber was always moving, her mother Robin Cates would later recall, her voice soft with memory. Even when she was sitting still, her foot would be tapping or her fingers would be drumming. She had this vibrant energy that filled whatever room she was in. That Sunday morning was no different. Amber flitted between the bathroom and kitchen, grabbing a bowl of cereal while simultaneously applying mascara in the reflection of the microwave door. Her bedroom, still preserved exactly as she left it years later, reflected her personality. Posters of Eminem and Blink 182 taped the walls, a cheerleading uniform hanging in the closet alongside her Columbia Central High School Letterman jacket, and a clutter of makeup, school books, and handwritten notes scattered across her vanity. She was excited about spring break, remembers her sister Brandy Bailey, 8 years older and already married with 2 children of her own. We talked the night before about what she might do. She mentioned possibly visiting our aunt in Nashville or staying with a friend. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Amber's life, like many teenagers, existed in a delicate balance between childhood dependency and burgeoning independence. In recent months, she had been navigating the choppy waters of her parents' divorce, splitting time between her mother's home on Tracy Lane and her father's residence across town. Friends noted subtle changes in her behavior, a newfound seriousness, occasional moodiness, and a growing desire for autonomy that sometimes manifested as defiance. She was testing boundaries, says former classmate Jessica Martinez, who sat behind Amber in chemistry class, but not in a concerning way, just typical teenage stuff. She wanted more freedom, more say in her life. Who doesn't at 16? As the morning progressed, Amber's movements became more deliberate. Around 10 a.m., she called her best friend Sarah Jenkins from the landline in the kitchen. The phone cord stretched taut as she paced between the refrigerator and the back door. She wanted to know if I wanted to hang out, Sarah recalled, her voice still carrying the disbelief of 2 decades. I told her I had to help my mom with some stuff, but maybe later. We made plans to call each other that evening. The conversation lasted 7 minutes, precisely logged on a phone bill that would later become evident. In that time, Amber mentioned she might be getting a ride from someone she knew, though she didn't specify who. The casual nature of this detail would later haunt investigators. Around noon, Robin returned home from running errands to find Amber dressed and ready to leave, wearing her favorite low-rise jeans, a pink halter top, and white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she carried a small purse containing only her driver's permit, lip gloss, and $20 in cash. She seemed anxious to go, Robin remembers, standing at the kitchen counter where she last saw her daughter. I asked where she was going and who she was with. She said she'd call me later that night. That wasn't unusual. Amber was at that age where she didn't always share every detail of her plan. What Robin didn't know was that Amber had been communicating with someone new in her life, someone outside her usual circle of friends. Phone records would later reveal several calls to a number not in her contacts, though the content of those conversations would remain unknown. At approximately 1:15 p.m., a gold Mazda pulled into the Cates driveway. Robin was in the laundry room and didn't see the car arrive, but she heard the front door close and Amber's footsteps on the porch. I called out, "Be careful. Love you," as she left, Robin says, her voice cracking with the memory. She said, "Love you too, Mom." Back, that was the last time I ever heard her voice. A neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who was watering her petunias across the street, would later provide the only confirmed eyewitness account of Amber's departure. She saw a teenage girl matching Amber's description get into the passenger side of a gold Mazda. The driver was a white male with dark hair, but distance and sunlight reflecting off the windshield prevented her from identifying him clearly. The car had a license plate with letters and numbers, Mrs. Henderson told investigators. I remember thinking it was unusual because personalized plates weren't as common back then. I think it started with PFB. The license plate, later confirmed as PFB 200, belonged to a gold Mazda that had been reported stolen from a Nashville dealership 2 weeks earlier. The connection between the stolen vehicle and Amber's disappearance would become a crucial, yet frustratingly limited, piece of the investigation. As the Mazda pulled away from the curb, Amber likely had no idea she was driving into a mystery that would consume 2 decades of investigation, fracture her family, and leave an entire community searching for answers. The car turned right onto Tracy Lane, then left onto James Campbell Boulevard, disappearing from view and, as it would turn out, from the world she knew. The first 24 hours passed with little alarm. Amber had a history of occasionally staying out later than planned without calling, and the recent tensions at home made her, mother, initially hesitant to overreact. When Amber hadn't called by 10 p.m. that night, Robin tried her daughter's cell phone repeatedly. Each call went directly to voicemail. I kept telling myself she just lost track of time or her phone had died, Robin recalls. But there was this knot forming in my stomach that grew tighter with each unanswered call. By Monday morning, when Amber missed her shift at the local McDonald's where she worked part-time, concern turned to alarm. Robin called the Maury County Sheriff's Office to report her daughter missing. Deputy Mike Harrison, who took the initial report, categorized Amber as a probable runaway based on her age and recent family tension. In 2004, our protocols for missing teenagers were different, explains retired Sheriff's Captain Frank Whitmore, who later reviewed the case. Statistically, most missing teens returned home within 48 to 72 hours, unless there were clear signs of foul play. Cases often began with the assumption of voluntary absence. This initial classification would prove critical in the precious first hours of the investigation. With Amber labeled as a likely runaway, immediate search efforts were limited. No Amber Alert was issued. No roadblocks were established. The stolen gold Mazda with its distinctive license plate wasn't entered into state or national databases as connected to a missing person case until days later. As Monday stretched into Tuesday, the Cates family's anxiety intensified. Amber's father, John Cate, drove to Nashville to check with their aunt, who hadn't seen Amber. Friends and classmates began calling and texting, but Amber's phone remained silent. Her social media account, primitive by today's standards but active at the time, showed no new activity. She would never just disappear like this, insists Brandy, who by Tuesday had organized a small search party of friends and family. Amber lived for her social connection. She was on her phone constantly, texting friends, updating her status. The silence was wrong. On Wednesday, April 14th, 3 days after Amber's disappearance, the case took its first significant turn. A maintenance worker discovered Amber's purse abandoned in a trash can behind the Big Lots shopping center on South Main Street, less than 2 miles from her home. Her driver's permit and $20 were missing, but everything else remained untouched. Lip gloss, house keys, a folded note with song lyrics, and a receipt from a gas station dated April 10th. The discovery shifted the investigation's trajectory. Runaways typically take their identification and money with them. The abandoned purse suggested something more sinister had occurred. Investigators expanded their search, bringing in cadaver dogs to comb nearby wooded areas and divers to search local ponds and waterways. The FBI was notified of a possible abduction. Detectives interviewed Amber's friends, teachers, and co-workers, building a timeline of her final days. They learned about the recent tensions at home, her budding romance with a classmate named Tyler, and her occasional use of marijuana, details that painted a picture of a typical teenager navigating the complexities of adolescence. Nothing in her background suggested she would run away permanently, says Detective Lisa Park, who was assigned to the case in 2005. She had plans for the summer, was saving up for a car, had recently auditioned for the school play. Amber had roots and future plans. That's what made this case so perplexing. The investigation expanded beyond Maury County. As tips began trickling in, a truck driver reported seeing a girl matching Amber's description at a rest stop outside Birmingham, Alabama. A convenience store clerk in Memphis claimed a similar-looking teenager had purchased snacks late on April 11th. Each potential sighting was investigated, but none could be confirmed as Amber. As weeks turned to months, the initial media attention that had surrounded Amber's disappearance began to wane. Local news outlets moved on to other stories. The community's outrage and concern gradually softened into a lingering sadness. For the Cates family, however, the nightmare was just beginning. In August 2004, For months after Amber vanished, investigators received their first significant break. A confidential informant in Nashville mentioned a man known as Ronald California Inzariga, who had been driving a gold Mazda similar to the one seen in Amber's neighborhood. Inzariga, a 32-year-old with a criminal record, including sexual offenses, had recently moved to Tennessee from California and was known to associate with teenagers in the area. Detectives brought Inzariga in for questioning on August 15, 2004. He admitted to knowing Amber through mutual acquaintances, but denied any involvement in her disappearance. When asked about his whereabouts on April 11th, he claimed he had been working at a construction site in Nashville, though he couldn't provide specific co-workers who could verify his alibi. He was cool during the interview, recalls Detective Mike Harrison, who conducted the interrogation. Too cool, maybe. He didn't seem concerned that a teenage girl was missing, even though he admitted knowing her. But we had nothing concrete, no physical evidence, no witnesses placing him with Amber. We couldn't hold him. Without enough evidence to charge Inzariga, investigators were forced to release him. He left Tennessee shortly after the questioning, reportedly returning to California. The gold Mazda was never found, and no definitive link between Inzariga and the vehicle could be established. As 2004 drew to a close, the investigation had accumulated hundreds of pages of report, dozens of witness statements, and countless hours of manpower, but no answers. Amber's room remained untouched, her clothes still hanging in the closet, her textbooks on her desk. The family celebrated her 17th birthday in November with a cake and candles, but no Amber to blow them out. The case had officially gone cold. For the Cates family, the first year without Amber passed in a haze of grief, anger, and desperate hope. Robin quit her job as a dental hygienist, unable to focus on work while her daughter remained missing. She spent her days tracking down tips, calling investigators, and maintaining a bedroom that felt more like a shrine than a space for a living teenager. I couldn't bring myself to move anything, Robin explained, standing in the doorway of Amber's room years later. Her pajamas were still on the floor where she'd kicked them off. That morning, the glass of water on her nightstand had a film of dust on it, but I wouldn't wash it. If I changed anything, it felt like I was accepting she was never coming back. Brandy became the family's public voice, creating flyers, organizing searches, and speaking to any media outlet that would listen. She established a Facebook page, still active today, dedicated to keeping Amber's case in the public consciousness. The page has amassed over 50,000 followers, a testament to both Brandy's persistence and the enduring mystery surrounding Amber's disappearance. Someone knows what happened to my sister, Brandy stated firmly during a 2006 press conference, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure they don't forget her. The second year brought new challenges. As time passed, the initial wave of community support began to ebb. The search parties dwindled from dozens to a handful of dedicated family and friends. The media calls became less frequent. The world moved forward, but the Cates family remained trapped in April 2004. It's a strange kind of grief, Robin reflects, her eyes distant. When someone dies, your closure, you can mourn, you can move through the stages of grief. But when someone just disappears, you're stuck in this limbo. Every time a phone rings, a part of you wonders if it's her. Every teenage girl you see from a distance, your heart jumps. The family developed rituals to mark Amber's absence. On her birthday, they would release balloons, 17 the first year, 18 the next, and so on. On the anniversary of her disappearance, they would hold a candlelight vigil at the courthouse square, the flames flickering against the stone columns as local news cameras captured the dwindling gathering. We had to do something, Brandy says. We had to mark the time, to show the world and ourselves that Amber was still important, still remembered. The investigation continued sporadically. Detective Lisa Park, who had taken a special interest in the case, followed up on tips as they came in. Most were dead ends, mistaken identities, false confessions from people seeking attention, or well-meaning but incorrect citing. A few times, Park drove to neighboring states to investigate potential leads, each time returning empty-handed. In missing persons cases, especially cold cases, you learn to manage expectations, Park explained. You follow every lead, no matter how slim, because you never know which one might break the case open. But you also learn to live with disappointment, to push through the frustration, and keep going. In 2008, for years after Amber's disappearance, the case experienced a brief resurgence of attention when a similar disappearance occurred in a neighboring county. 17-year-old Megan Richardson vanished from a shopping mall in similar circumstances, last seen getting into a car with an unidentified male. The similarities between the cases were striking enough that the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation formed a task force to explore possible connections. For 3 months, investigators worked tirelessly, comparing details, searching for patterns, and interviewing persons of interest in both cases. Then, In October 2008, Megan Richardson's body was discovered in a wooded area 50 miles from her home. Evidence quickly pointed to her former boyfriend, who confessed the crime after a lengthy interrogation. The task force was disbanded, and Amber's case once again faded into the background. The false hope had been devastating for the Cates family. When we heard about Megan, part of us thought, this could be it. This could lead us to Amber, Brandy recalls. Finding her body was tragic, but we thought it might provide answers for us too. When it didn't, it was like losing her all over again. As the years accumulated, the family's advocacy evolved. Brandy began working with other families of missing persons, forming a support network that shared resources, information, and emotional support. She lobbied state legislators for improved missing persons protocol, particularly for cases involving potential abduction. In 2012, her efforts contributed to the passage of Amber's Law, which standardized the initial response to missing persons cases in Tennessee, eliminating the 24-hour waiting period that had hampered Amber's investigation. We couldn't get Amber back, Brandy told reporters at the bill's signing, her voice thick with emotion. But maybe we could help other families avoid some of the pain we've endured. Maybe we can ensure that no other missing person falls through the cracks simply because of bureaucracy or assumption. The 10th anniversary of Amber's disappearance in 2014 brought renewed media attention. Local newspapers produced retrospective pieces. National true crime podcasts featured her story. The Maury County Sheriff's Office held a press conference to assure the public that Amber's case remained open and that investigators continue to follow up on leads. Sheriff Enoch George spoke at the annual Candlelight Vigil that year, his voice echoing across the courthouse square. "We have not forgotten Amber Cates," he told a small crowd. "We have not given up on finding answers for her family. This case remains active and will remain active until we bring closure to this mystery." The vigil marked a turning point for Robin Cates. After a decade of maintaining Amber's room exactly as she had left it, she finally began to make small changes. She packed away the clothes that Amber had outgrown, organized the scattered papers on her desk, and updated the bedding to something more neutral. People asked if I was giving up, Robin remembers, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But I wasn't. I was just accepting that my life couldn't stay on hold forever. Amber would be a woman now, not a teenager. It was time for me to accept that, even if I could never accept not knowing what happened to her. The following years brought new developments in forensic technology that offered glimmers of hope. DNA analysis techniques that had been in their infancy in 2004 had become sophisticated enough to extract genetic material from the smallest sample. The FBI's database of missing persons had expanded dramatically, increasing the chances of matching unidentified remains with missing persons cases. In 2018, investigators revisited evidence from Amber's case, sending items from her abandoned purse for advanced DNA testing. They hoped to find traces of whoever had handled it last. The results were disappointing. No unknown DNA profiles were recovered. Only Amber's and family members' DNA from normal youth. That same year, Brandy connected with a retired FBI profiler who had worked on numerous missing persons cases. He agreed to review Amber's case file pro bono, looking for patterns or connections that might have been missed. After 3 months of analysis, he concluded that the most likely scenario remained abduction by someone Amber knew, possibly Ronald, California in Zariga, though without additional evidence. This remained speculation. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, the profiler wrote in his report. In cases like this, the perpetrator often leaves few traces because they know the victim and have planned their actions carefully. The fact that no body has been found may actually be intentional, a means of preventing closure and maintaining control. The report provided little comfort to the family, but reinforced their commitment to keeping Amber's story visible. Brandy expanded her advocacy work, partnering with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to raise awareness about cases involving teenage victims. She appeared on national talk shows, participated in documentaries, and maintained a steady presence on social media, ensuring that Amber's face continued to circulate in the public consciousness. "Every time I share Amber's story, I wonder if someone who knows something will see it," Brandy explained. "Maybe someone who was too scared to come forward in 2004 has had a change of heart. Maybe someone who didn't realize the significance of what they saw will now understand its importance. I have to believe that somewhere, someone holds the key to this mystery." As the 20th anniversary approached, the case received another significant boost. In early 2023, the FBI announced a renewed focus on cold cases involving missing juveniles, allocating additional resources and offering substantial rewards for information leading to resolution. Amber's case was selected as one of the initial priorities, and a $25,000 reward was announced for credible information about her disappearance or the location of her remains. Special Agent Maria Rodriguez, who had recently transferred to the Nashville field office, took charge of the renewed investigation. With 2 decades of experience in violent crimes and missing persons cases, Rodriguez brought fresh eyes and new techniques to the investigation. Technology has evolved significantly since 2004, Rodriguez explained during a press conference announcing the renewed effort. We have tools now that weren't available then: advanced DNA analysis, digital forensics, sophisticated data mining. We're re-examining every aspect of this case with these new capabilities. The FBI team began by digitizing the entire case file, creating a searchable database of thousands of pages of reports, witness statements, photographs, and evidence log. They used facial recognition software to compare Amber's photos with unidentified remains in national databases. They conducted additional interviews with people who had been involved in the original investigation, hoping to jog memories or uncover details that might have seemed insignificant at the time. We're casting a wide net, Rodriguez says. We're looking at this case from every possible angle: human trafficking networks, serial offenders operating in the region at the time, personal conflicts that might have escalated. We're not ruling anything out. The renewed federal attention brought a surge of tips, over 200 in the first month alone. Each one was investigated, though most proved to be recirculated information or well-intentioned but unhelpful suggestions. Among the tips, however, were a few that caught investigators' attention. A former resident of Columbia reported seeing a gold Mazda matching the description of Amber's vehicle abandoned in a wooded area near the Natchez Trace Parkway in late April 2004. At the time, she hadn't connected it to the missing teenager, but the recent media coverage had triggered the memory. Another tip came from a truck driver who remembered giving a ride to a young woman matching Amber's description to a truck stop in Arkansas in early May 2004. The woman had been quiet and seemed frightened, but the driver hadn't thought much of it at the time. Perhaps most significantly, investigators received information about Ronald, California, Inzarriaga's activities in 2004. A former associate claimed that Inzarriaga had been involved in transporting teenage girls across state lines for a trafficking network operating between Tennessee, Arkansas, and California. The associate, who was serving time for unrelated charges, provided details about routes, methods, and contacts that aligned with aspects of Amber's case. Inzarriaga, who had been living in California under an assumed name, was located and brought in for questioning in June 2023. Now in his early 50s, he maintained his innocence but appeared less composed than during his 2004 interrogation. "I didn't have anything to do with that girl's disappearance," he insisted, his voice strained. "I don't know what happened to her, and I don't care. I just want to be left alone." Under intense questioning, Inzarriaga admitted to knowing Amber, but claimed their interaction was limited to casual encounters through mutual friends. When confronted with information about his alleged involvement in trafficking, he became defensive and eventually requested an attorney, ending the interview. Without physical evidence or a confession, investigators couldn't charge Inzarriaga in connection with Amber's disappearance. However, the information provided by his former associate led to a broader investigation into the trafficking network, which resulted in several arrests and the rescue of multiple victims across 3 states. "We believe Amber may have been an early victim of this network," Rodriguez stated carefully in a press briefing. "While we haven't found direct evidence connecting her to these individuals, the timeline and circumstances align closely. We're continuing to pursue this angle with the hope that it will eventually lead us to answers about what happened to Amber." The development brought mixed emotions for the Cates family. The possibility that Amber had been victim of a trafficking network was horrifying, yet it provided a potential explanation for her disappearance and the lack of evidence in her case. "It's devastating to think of what she might have gone through," Robin admits, her voice barely above a whisper. "But in a strange way, it's easier than imagining she was just gone, vanished into thin air. At least this theory has logic to it, however painful that logic might be." Brandy, however, remained cautious. "We've been down this road before," she says. "We've had promising leads that went nowhere. I appreciate the FBI's work, and I'm grateful for their renewed attention to Amber's case. But until we have definitive answers, until we know for certain what happened, I won't let myself believe too strongly in any particular theory." As summer 2023 progressed, investigators expanded their search, using ground-penetrating radar to examine areas near where the gold Mazda was reportedly abandoned. They conducted aerial surveys of rural areas areas in neighboring counties, looking for signs of disturbed earth that might indicate a clandestine burial site. They subpoenaed phone records from 2004, hoping to find connections between persons of interest that might have been missed in the initial investigation. The FBI also partnered with forensic anthropologists from the University of Tennessee, who had developed new techniques for analyzing skeletal remains and determining post-mortem intervals. The team reviewed unidentified remains that had been discovered in the region since 2004, applying these advanced techniques in hopes of identifying previously unknown victims who might be Amber. We're looking at this case from every possible angle, Rodriguez explained. Traditional investigative methods, cutting-edge forensic science, behavioral analysis, data analytics. We're committed to bringing answers to this.